Well, we'll start off this album with a shot of us leaving 4685 Astor Drive on Wednesday, July the 25th. We flew United Airlines to Amsterdam, changing planes in Denver and Chicago. We arrived at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam on Thursday morning, where we met up with some of our tour group. We'd booked this trip through Grand Circle Travel. It was about a 45-minute bus ride from the airport to the dock, and on the way we passed Dolly Parton Bridge. And here is River Concerto, our home for the next 14 days. I'll start off with a quick look around the ship. Obviously, this is the main lobby area. The dining room. Our cabin had a small balcony. There were two single pull-down beds in the cabin. And this is the rear sun deck. After getting settled on board, we went for a stroll around Amsterdam. The Netherlands is well known for its bicycles, and Amsterdam had lots and lots of them. It also had lots and lots of bare bums. In the evening we went for an educational stroll around the red light district. The taking of photographs in the red light district is strictly forbidden, so you'll have to ignore the previous photo and look at these. On Friday morning we went on our official tour of the town. And one of the best ways to see Amsterdam is by canal boat. The town, often referred to as the Venice of the North, has one river, the Amstel, and 160 canals, creating 90 artificial islands, and they're connected by 1,281 bridges. These warehouses, where coffee, sugar and spices were stored in the 17th and 18th centuries, are now very expensive apartments with picturesque views of the canal. These are the hoisting cranes that were used to load the merchandise into the buildings. The canals are an important part of Amsterdam's highway system. Quite a few people live on their Dutch barges. We concluded our canal trip with a visit to Gasson's Diamond Showroom. Pat decided to buy this one. While we were in Amsterdam, we also visited the Van Gogh Museum. It houses the largest collection of his work in the world. This is a self-portrait that he painted in the spring and summer of 1887. Around 3 o'clock we returned to the ship and got underway. The first waterway we cruised along was the Amsterdam-Rhine Canal. It connects the city with the Rhine River. This is Janet. She was raised in Battersea. We became good friends with her and her husband Harry during the cruise. Holland is famous for its windmills, but this is the only one that we saw. It's time for the safety drill. And then it was time for an afternoon nap to catch up on some jet lag. We were very surprised to find out that we'd been invited to the captain's table for dinner on Friday evening. These are our Grand Circle Travel Program Directors, Judith, Marcus and Bernadette. Marcus was the leader of our group. We cruised along the Rhine in the night and reached the outskirts of Cologne around 7:30 on Saturday morning. Now there's some interesting German architecture. Now for a little about our first stop, Cologne. It's Germany's fourth largest city after Berlin, Hamburg and Munich. It has a population of more than 10 million and it's in the federal state of North Rhine-Westphalia. It's one of the oldest cities in Germany, having been founded by the Romans in 30 BC. Cologne's well known for its beer, called Kolsch, and its eau de Cologne, and of course its cathedral. In World War II, the city endured 262 air raids, which caused approximately 20,000 civilian casualties and completely wiped out the centre of the city. Here's Captain Ivan Galic checking to make sure we're tied off correctly. He's from Croatia and was very approachable and friendly. After lunch, Marcus took us on a guided walk around the city. Pat got to meet a couple of the local residents. And I had a chat with one of them. We walked around town for an hour or so and then went to see one of Germany's most visited buildings, the Cologne Cathedral. It's located in the centre of a unique group of 12 Romanesque churches. All of them predate 1220, but some of them had to be almost entirely reconstructed after the war. The nave has 2 aisles on either side, and this helps support one of the highest Gothic vaults in the world. Pat met another local outside the cathedral. The mime appreciated the donation. After the cathedral, it was time to find a place to taste that local Kolsch. Okay, what's the verdict? Not bad, but nowhere near as good as an English pint. We left Cologne around 11 p.m. Once again we cruised through the night and around 8 a.m. on Sunday morning arrived at the city of Koblenz. It's located at the Rhine's confluence with the Moselle River. It's in the state of Rhineland-Palatinate and has a population of around 100,000 people. Although many of the buildings had to be restored after the war, the town definitely hasn't lost its character. This Gothic building houses the Mittelrhein Museum. That's the Middle Rhine Museum. Notice the organ roller? That's the eye roller under the clock. His eyes move back and forth as the seconds tick by. This is one of the domes of the 12th century Church of Our Lady. The church originally had steeples, but they were burnt down by Louis XIV's French troops and were replaced with the onion domes. These are typical of the Baroque period. They were destroyed during the bombing of World War II and rebuilt in the 50s. Meet Max and Moritz. The 7 tricks that these two played on others are told in German nursery rhymes. Here they are stealing the chicken from the fireplace, and the poor little dog is going to get blamed for it. Here's a closer look at them getting up to their tricks. There are whimsical statues all over Koblenz. This jolly market woman is telling the jolly policeman that a neighbour's dog has peed on her husband. I'm not sure what problem the other two have got. This mischievous, high-spirited Koblenz boy on top of the fountain is called Schengel. He doesn't like authority and he has an interesting way of showing you that. He spits on you as you pass the fountain. Schengel is also on every manhole cover in town. This interesting 30-foot column depicts 200 years of Koblenz history from Roman times till today. After our guided tour, we strolled around on our own. This is the landmark statue of Kaiser Wilhelm I. It was under his and Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck's leadership that Prussia unified Germany and established the German Empire. Actually, the statue is a bronze replica. The original from 1897 was destroyed during the war. The pedestal stood empty from 1953 to 1990 as a reminder of divided Germany, and it wasn't until 1993 that a copy was put in its place. The area where the Moselle, on the right, flows into the Rhine is called German Corner or Deutsches Eck. The flags represent the 16 states of reunified Germany. Also flying as a symbol of peace between the countries are the flags of Germany, the European Community and the United States. As we walked back to the ship, we saw quite a few of these ducks. Not sure what type they are. In the afternoon we went on an optional bus tour to Marksburg Castle with a stop at Maximilian Brewery to taste the local beer and have a pretzel. Unfortunately, I forgot to take my camera. We were back on board in time for the Inner Circle cocktail party. This was for passengers who'd been on 4 or more Grand Circle or overseas adventure travel packages. This photo was taken from our cabin. It's now Monday the 30th. Now for some shots of the countryside and castles as we cruised along from Koblenz to our next port of call. I'll try and identify some of the interesting places, but I won't go into a lot of detail about them. Besides the local scenery, it was also interesting to check out the river traffic. This barge is laden with coal. Okay, let's start our history lesson. This is Maus Castle, M-A-U-S. It was built in 1356 by the Archbishop of Treves in order to protect his state against the Counts of Katzenelnbogen, who lived further up the river. The Katzenelnbogens are said to have scornfully referred to the Archbishop's castle as the Mouse, and that it would eventually be devoured by the cat of Katzenelnbogen. Rheinfels Castle was built above the town of St. Goar in 1245 by Count Dieter von Katzenelnbogen. It was converted in the 16th century into an impressive Renaissance mansion, and again in the 17th and 18th centuries into the most formidable fortress on the Rhine. Not until 1794 was Rheinfels captured by the French troops and blown up. But even in its state of destruction, the huge mass of ruins covering the top of the hill is still one of the most noteworthy sights along the Rhine. Here's a closer look at the ruins of Rheinfels. Katz Castle, that's K-A-T-Z, is set like a crown on the hillside overlooking St. Gorhausen. It was built by Count Johann of Katzenelnbogen at the end of the 14th century. Destroyed only in 1807 and restored a century later, the name of the castle used to be Castle New Katzenelnbogen, but it's been now shortened to Katz. This is the famous Lorelei Rock. Legend has it that a siren sat on this rock and enticed sailors to their destruction on the reef below. And here is the siren. The town of Oberwiesel has 15 watchtowers. Oberwiesel is dominated by Schönberg Castle. Originally built in the 10th century, it's now a 4-star hotel. The part overlooking the river has been converted into a youth hostel. Pfalz-Grafenstein, or easier to say, the Pfalz, is an extraordinary stronghold in the middle of the Rhine. It's across from the little town of Korb. King Ludwig of Bavaria built this castle in the 14th century so he could collect tolls from the river traffic. Looking down on the town is Gutenfels Castle. It's still well preserved and it dates back to the 13th century. Stalag Castle, overlooking the medieval town of Bacharach, was first mentioned in the 10th century. Well, it looks like Paddy's castled out, so this shot of Rheinstein Castle will be the last one from today's cruise. This was definitely one of the most inspiring parts of the Rhine. Lots of interesting castles. Around 9:30 in the morning, our next port of call came into view. We docked up Mainz at 10 o'clock. The city's on the west bank of the Rhine near its confluence with the river Main. Now it's actually spelled M-A-I-N, but it's pronounced Main. Mainz is the capital of Rhineland-Palatinate and it has a population of around 200,000 people. After docking, we went on our guided tour of the city. This is Mance's 11th century Romanesque cathedral, also known as St. Martin's Cathedral. This is the main nave of the cathedral. The next stop on our tour was an interesting visit to Gutenberg Museum. The ladies explaining to us how Johann Gutenberg's 15th century printing press worked. It is a replica of the original one. Gutenberg produced the first printed versions of the Bible on his press in the mid-15th century. It's believed that he printed about 180 copies, 45 of them on vellum, that's animal hide, and 135 on paper. This is the market square, but being Sunday there wasn't much going on. There's Pat taking a rest break with a fellow passenger. In the evening we went on another optional tour, this time to the town of Rudolph for some dinner, dance and fun. Our first stop was at Peter Olig's winery. We started off with a tour of the wine cellar. They have some interesting wine barrels. After looking around the cellar, it was time to try some of that German Riesling wine. Then it was off to the Lindwert restaurant in the Drosselgasse. We started off with a traditional German dinner. Then it was pa and dance time. We had a little problem with our jitterbug routine. Next came Tequila Slammers German style. I was ready for round 2. Now it's time to go back to the ship. The optional tour cost $70 a person, but it was a fun evening. We remained tied up overnight in Mainz, and on Tuesday morning we went for a stroll while some of the passengers went on an optional tour to Heidelberg. A few of the old buildings were restored after the war, but a lot of Mainz was rebuilt with modern buildings. Overall, we were not that impressed with the city, and partly because there was a lot of graffiti everywhere. We left Mainz around noon and said goodbye to the Rhine River and started cruising on the Main. By the way, we're going to be going through 66 locks on our way to Vienna. This is Kolstein Lock, the first one we went through on the Main. It was a relatively small one with a drop of only 10 foot, but I'll mention more about locks later on. And we did pass through a couple of locks on the Rhine-Amsterdam during the night. Here's some more interesting buildings as we approach the suburbs of Frankfurt. We made a stop at Offenbach near Frankfurt to pick up the passengers who'd gone on the Heidelberg tour. While we were waiting for them, we went ashore and found a beer hall. Here's a misty shot from our balcony on Wednesday morning as we head for Wertheim. After breakfast we had an interesting glass blowing demonstration by Karl Itteg in the ship's lounge. Other than the brief stop at Offenbach on Tuesday, we cruised through the night and arrived at Wertheim at 9:30 on Wednesday morning. This is the most northerly town in the state of Baden-Württemberg. It was founded in the late 12th century and it's situated at the junction of the rivers Main and Tiber. It's got a population of around 25,000 people. By 10:30 we were off on our walk around town. This is the 13th century lookout and watchtower called Spitzerturm. Before visiting the old town we went for a short stroll along the Tiber River. There are a number of interesting buildings and towers in this medieval town. The Protestant church, the Stiftskirche, has existed in Gothic style architecture since 1383. The tower has 2 clocks. This one, with only an hour hand, was for the residents of the castle. The other faces the town and has an hour and a minute hand. Burg Wertheim is the landmark of the town. The castle ruins loom over it. Pat was feeling good, so we decided to go and check it out. There are some nice views from the ruins. That's the River Concerto moored up on the River Main. Here's another look at the ship and the town. I made it to the top of the highest watchtower. That's the tower I took the previous photo from. Although she didn't get to the very top of the tower, Pat did really well. We're back in the town centre and heading to the ship for lunch. We did visit Carl Iddig's shop on the way and bought a couple of glass ornaments. In the afternoon we had a bus ride out into the country and had coffee and cake with Oliver and Christina Brewer at their home in Wertheim, Hohenfeld. Home-hosted events are a regular feature of Grand Circle and OAT tours. These are their two daughters. We left Wertheim about midnight and cruised through the night. At 8 a.m. on Thursday morning we went through Himmelstadt Lock. Actually, we went through a number of locks during the night, and some of the passengers who were in the lower decks said the noise kept them awake. But we had no problems, even though we had our balcony door open. Some of the locks, like this one at Erlebrunn, are controlled by a lockkeeper stationed at a totally different lock. Here we are, taking it easy on the sun deck as we cruise past the small community of Margit Schockheim. We arrived at Wurzburg Lock around 12:30. This is a shot of the old mine bridge as we left the lock. The bridge was built in 1472 and many of the statues of saints were added in the mid-1700s. It was 1 p.m. when we tied up in Wurzburg, a city with a population of about 130,000 residents located on the northern tip of the state of Bavaria. On March the 16th, 1945, 85% of the city was destroyed by some 225 Lancaster bombers in 17 minutes. Most of its churches, cathedrals and other monuments didn't survive, while the city centre, dating from medieval times, was totally destroyed. During the next 20 years, the buildings of historical importance were painstakingly and accurately replicated. We had a little problem during the night. Apparently a barge that was coming towards us forced us to turn too sharply as we were coming out from underneath one of the bridges. The bridge got the better of the argument. We docked across from the Pilgrim Church, that's locally known as Kapelle. It dates from the mid-1700s. Today we visited Wurzburg Residence, one of the most important Baroque palaces in Europe. This statue of Raconia in the courtyard pays tribute to the three Wurzburg most famous artists. Matthias Grunwald, he was a painter from 1470 to 1528. Walter van Voldewijk, a poet, 1170 to 1230. And Tilman Riemenschneider, a painter and sculptor, 1460 to 1531. The residence was built between 1719 and 1744 and was the palace of the Prince Bishops. Today it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of Europe's most ornate Baroque palaces. The inside was spectacular. Unfortunately, I didn't get to take any photographs of it. However, I did borrow this photograph to give you some idea of what it was like. After the tour, we strolled around the residence gardens. This is Evelyn. She and her husband Kurt emigrated from Germany after World War II. He was in the German army. It started to rain a little as we explored the city centre. This is the medieval Marienburg fortress. It served as the residence of the Prince Bishops from soon after it was constructed in 1200 until they moved into the residence. I took this shot of the fortress while I was on an evening stroll. Pat took it easy while I went on my stroll and soothed her swollen legs and ankles. It's Friday, August the 3rd. We made an early morning stop at Gerlischhausen to let the people going on the Rothenburg tour catch their bus. We visited Rothenburg in the 80s, so decided to skip this all-day tour and enjoy a restful day on board. An interesting feature of the River Concerto was its electronically adjustable wheelhouse. From this shot you can see why it was needed. The bridges were very, very low. The passengers also had to duck down or lose their heads. Here's Captain Ivan receiving my permission to raise the wheelhouse. Now for a few photos of our cruise along the River Main on Friday. There was plenty to see and lots of river barges to check out. The next few shots are of us going through Whitfeld Lock. You could still see what was going on from your cabin on the closed-circuit TV. You could steer from inside the wheelhouse or from either side of the ship. That's the small wine-producing village of Whitfeld we are passing. These are the controls the captain was using. The black lever is for the bow thruster, and the other two are for the port and starboard propellers. If you want a detailed technical explanation by Pat, press the spacebar or click on the slide.
Over the props, left and right props.
Yeah.
The bow thruster.
Yeah.
Going either way.
Yeah.
Back to full speed, I don't know.
Here I am taking in the scenery with Harry and Janet. There are some interesting side washes along the river. As the ship approaches, it pushes the water into them. Then they drain out with quite a bit of force, flushing the silt out into the main channel. We're now cruising through Franconia Vineland, the wine country. There's lots and lots of vineyards. Schloss Meinberg, now a hotel, is nestled among the vineyards. The castle's history dates back to the 11th century. This is the first nautical officer, Anton de Bot. He's from the Netherlands and, like the captain, was very friendly and approachable. I spent quite a bit of time chatting with him. We arrived at the small Bavarian town of Haßfurt around 5 p.m. and tied off for the night. The main reason for stopping here was to pick up the passengers who went on the Rothenburg tour. We had to wait for this grain barge to be loaded before we could tie off. There were no organised tours, so we strolled around this attractive little Bavarian town with Harry and Janet. Its Hauptstrasse, the main street, is guarded by two massive medieval tower gates. This one is called Oberes Tor. No matter where you are in the world, kids love to splash in the water. We were told to check out the twin-towered Gothic church of St. Kilian. The main door was locked, but we managed to get in through a side door. Inside are wooden statues by the famous 15th century sculptor and woodcarver Tilman Riemenschneider. This one is of the patron saint and Irish martyr St. Kilian and his companions, St. Colonnet and St. Totnan. Of better quality is this one of the Madonna, and this one of John the Baptist. After our visit to the church, we went in search of the Goller Brewery and Beer Hall. We found it, and besides having some good Bavarian dark beer, the friendly proprietor gave Harry and me a glass each. Back on board, it was time to tuck in and get a good night's sleep in preparation for tomorrow's adventure. We left Haßfurt early Saturday morning for a short cruise to our next destination. This photo was taken around 7:30 as we approached Vienna lock. This is the last lock we'll go through on the Main River. We arrived at Bamberg around 8:30 in the morning. It's located in Upper Franconia in Bavaria on the Regitz River, close to where its confluence is with the Main River. It has a population of around 70,000 people and was one of the few cities that was not destroyed in the war. It was a short bus ride from the ship to town. Our meeting point for our city tour was by the old slaughterhouse. It was located here so that the offal and renderings could be dumped right into the river. There's an interesting engraving above the door. The larger, taller letters are Roman numerals identifying when the building was built, and these numerals fit into the words that describe the purpose of the building. Very ingenious. This is the old City Hall. It was built on a man-made island in the middle of the river Regnitz. The bridge goes right through the middle of the building. The beautiful three-dimensional frescoes are renovated every 6 or 7 years. The original City Hall was built in the 1300s, but it was redesigned in its present Baroque Rococo style in the 1700s. On the wall of the City Hall is a plaque commemorating one of Bamberg's heroes, Klaus Graf von Stauffenberg. He was a colonel in the German army and one of the leading figures of the failed July 20th, 1944 plot to assassinate Hitler. The river divides the city into two distinct districts: the former ecclesiastical district, that's the side I'm on, and the former merchants' town. The bridge on the left was blown up by the Germans in 1945 as the American army approached. They wired two 500-pound bombs under the bridge and were careful to place the charges so it would blow straight up and thus spare the old City Hall building. It was a bit of a climb from the City Hall to the Domplatz, that's the Cathedral Square. This building used to be the residence of the bishops in the 16th and 17th centuries. Bamberg's cathedral's official name is Bamberg Cathedral of St. Peter and St. George. It's also called Kaiserdom, the Emperor Cathedral. It's one of the best-known architectural monuments in Germany, and it's been the city's most famous landmark since its completion in the 13th century. I wasn't able to get a very good shot of the nave because the sun was shining through the windows. The nativity altar is carved in limewood by the famous 15th century artist Vet Stoss. He was about 80 years old when he carved it. There were a lot of sculptures in the cathedral. One of the most magnificent is the marble tomb of Henry II, King of the Romans and founder of the cathedral. He's there with his wife, Empress Kunigund. It took Tilman Riemenschneider 14 years to carve it between 1499 and 1513. Alright, one last shot from inside the cathedral. The life-size equestrian statue by an anonymous medieval sculptor is called Der Bamberger Reiter, the Bamberg Horseman. Being located in a church and showing a crowned yet unarmed man, it's believed that it represents a historical king or saint. An obvious candidate is Henry II, but he most likely would have been depicted with imperial regala. Another possibility is his brother-in-law, King Stephen I of Hungary. Before heading back to town, we strolled around the cathedral's rose garden. We found our way back through the alleyways to Gasthaus Scheiner. This is where we tried Bamberg's famous smoked beer. It has a definite smoked sausage taste. It was okay, but it didn't end up on the top of my favourites list. After our liquid lunch, we explored some more of the town. This is near the terminus of the old Ludwig Main Danube Canal, built in 1825. The balconies and oriels on the buildings provided tanners enough air for drying leather and ventilating the rather unpleasant odour of the wet skins. The fishermen settled downstream from the pungent tanners into long, narrow and picturesque houses with steeply pitched roofs. This area of town is known as Klein Venedig, Little Venice. These buildings are no longer fishermen's quarters today. We left Bamberg around 2 p.m. and began our journey on the Rhine-Main-Danube Canal. It's also called the Main-Danube Canal or the Europa Canal. It connects the Main and Danube rivers running from Bamberg via Nuremberg to Kelheim and provides a navigable connection from the Rhine Delta in Rotterdam to the Danube Delta in eastern Romania, thereby connecting the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean to the Black Sea. It was completed in 1992 and it's 106 miles long. There are 16 locks on this man-made waterway. The first 11 ascend 517 feet up the Frankish Alb. We're waiting for this barge to come out of Strullendorf Lock. Most of the locks have guillotine gates. Strullendorf only had a rise and fall of 25 feet. We'll be going through some locks that are much deeper later on. The top gate lowers under the water about 3 to 4 feet. This is a top gate. I'm not sure if it's damaged or if they're just keeping it there for a spare. We often have barges join us in the locks. They're a standard 984 foot long and 39 foot wide. This sheepdog did a good job of keeping her flock under control. As you can tell, I like to keep track of where we were on the canal. I think this is Kragenbrunnen Lock we're entering. As you can see, there's not a lot of headroom to get underneath the guillotine gate. This is one of the deeper locks. It has a rise and fall of 59 feet. Being a canal, there had to be some winding holes, and they were somewhat larger than those I'm familiar with on the UK waterways. Dinner tonight was a Bavarian buffet. We arrived in Nuremberg, or Nuremberg as we call it, around 9 p.m. It has a population of about 500,000 and it's the largest city in the historic region of Franconia in Bavaria. The city does have a historic past, but it's best known for its association with the Nazi Party rallies and the anti-Semitic Nuremberg laws, as well as the Nuremberg trials. This was our overnight mooring. I went for a short walk in the evening while Pat took it easy on the balcony. We were moored some way out of town, so on Sunday morning they had a coach ready and waiting for us. Our first stop was at Duzenteek Lake. In the background's the largest building remaining from the Nazi period. It's the Congress Hall, and it was designed to house 50,000 people under a huge roof with no underpinnings inside the hall itself. The roof and the inside were never completed. The Zeppelin grandstand was constructed under Albert Speer's direction between 1934 and 1937. Hitler intended it to stand for thousands of years, similar to the great cathedrals of the past. 4 days after the fall of Nuremberg, the US Army blew up the swastika which had been installed at the centre of the grandstand. In 1967, the colonnade of the grandstand was blown up because it had become unstable. The height of the side towers was also reduced in half in the 1970s. This is all that remains of this once impressive structure. To the left of this parade strip is Zeppelin Field. It's a square complex in front of the Führer's Rostrum. It provided space for up to 200,000 people to attend the rallies. This is the view I had from what's left of the grandstand. Now for some old photos showing what it was like in the 1930s. This is the Nuremberg Palace of Justice. It's most famous for being the location of the famous Nuremberg trials that were held here after the Second World War. The best known of these trials was the trial of major war criminals before the International Military Tribunal. 24 of the most notorious Nazi leaders were tried between November the 20th, 45 and October the 1st, 46 in courtroom 600. It's still used today, but it has been refurbished and remodeled some since 1946. This is the door the accused came through to enter the courtroom. And this is the defendant's dock. The insert shows how it was during the trials. I'm standing next to where Hermann Göring was seated. We didn't get to see much of the historical side of Nuremberg. The bus drove us around the medieval wall and then dropped us off in the market square. This is the beautiful fountain, or the Schöne Brunnen. There are a number of tales and myths about the brass and iron rings in the wrought iron enclosure. Being Sunday, there wasn't much going on in the market square, so we walked up to Museum Bridge and to have a look at the Pegnitz River. This is the Heilig Geist Spital, or the Holy Spirit Hospital. It was built in the 1300s and today it's a senior citizens' home. It's time to have an ice cream before heading back to the bus. On the way we had a quick look around the inside of St. Sebaldus Church. It's dedicated to Sebaldus, an 8th century hermit and missionary who's now patron saint of Nuremberg. Opposite the church is the parish house with an interesting oriel window. In Nuremberg they call them Corleons. We left Nuremberg at lunchtime and continued along the canal. Some of the locks, like this one at Ebeck, had some side ponds to conserve water. I think this is the only aqueduct on the canal. It crosses over Piesendorfer Strasse near the town of Neusis. As you can see, most of the time we had excellent weather. Most of the modern houses seem to be designed for functionality rather than aesthetics. We are now starting our final climb up the last 3 locks to the summit pound. This one is Leerstetten. If you'd like to see a video of us entering and leaving this 82-foot deep lock, now's your chance. By 6 o'clock we'd reached the top lock, Hilpolstein, and the passengers and crews celebrated reaching the highest point on the Rhine-Main-Danube Canal. We're now at 1,340 foot above sea level. If you click on the slide or press the spacebar, you'll see Pat celebrating with Marcus. Clink your glasses, this is a moving thing. Okay? Okay, that's it for locks. Well, there might be a couple more shots because we've still got to descend 5 more on the canal and then another 14 on the Danube River before we get to Vienna. They didn't normally like passengers on deck at night time because of the low bridges. And I asked Anton if it would be okay if I stayed up there, and he said that wouldn't be a problem. It was definitely different seeing things at night. During the night we left the canal and started our cruise along the Danube. By 6 a.m. on Monday we'd reached our next port of call. Regensburg. It's located at the confluence of the Danube and Regen rivers and has a population of around 130,000. It's the capital of Upper Palatinate, one of the 7 administrative regions of Bavaria. As a point of interest, it's also the sister city of Tempe, Arizona. Here's an unusual shot of me taking a photo of Tony tidying up after breakfast. He was one of our waiters. By now our walking tours were getting a little bit repetitive. I also thought it was unnecessary that we had to have local guides as well as our own program directors in many of the towns we visited. The Romans built a fortress in Regensburg in 179 AD. This is the remains of the east tower of the Porta Praetoria, the northern gate. No walking tour would be complete without a visit to the cathedral. Our local guide became a little embarrassed when she found out that she told us that this engraving on the cathedral wall was St. Peter with his whore. Okay, Pat, let's see if we can find somewhere with a little less culture. We did. We took a stroll along the riverfront before going back to the ship for lunch. This steam barge was moored just along from us. After lunch we went on an optional afternoon tour called Bavaria Baroque and Beer. It costs $55 a person. We started off with a coach ride to Weltenberg to visit the Abbey. It was about a half-mile walk along the river to get to the Abbey, and here's an interesting way to get your car across the Danube. The Abbey is situated on a peninsula in the Danube called the Weltenberg Narrows or Danube Gorge. The monastery was founded by Irish or Scottish monks in about 620 and it's the oldest monastery in Bavaria. The main reason for coming here is to see the inside of the Abbey church. The organ towers over you as you enter. This is the pulpit. Unfortunately, I didn't get a very good shot of the altar with the patron St. George slaying the dragon. The ceiling fresco was really impressive. It represents the triumph of the Holy Church. It's brightly lit by 12 windows that are hidden from view by the inner domicle. You can see some of the hidden windows in this photo. After a talk in German by one of the Benedictine monks, it was time to taste the brewery's world-famous Weltenberger Cloister Barock Dunkel. And that was in a very crowded beer garden. It was okay, but not as good as Old Speckled Hen. Before leaving the Abbey, I went for a walk up the hillside to a small private chapel. Next on our afternoon tour was a cruise through the Danube Gorge. This is upriver from where the canal meets the Danube, so the big ships don't go along this part of it. It is a pretty stretch of the river, but it wasn't as scenic as we thought it was going to be. By the way, we'll be visiting that structure on the hill later on. After the cruise, we hopped back on the coach and drove to Kelheim. This is the other end of the now disbanded Ludwig Canal. Like the present-day one, it went over the Frankish Alb from Bamberg to Kelheim. This is the Hall of Liberation. It's a historic classical monument on Mount Michelsberg above the city of Kelheim. It was commissioned by King Ludwig I of Bavaria to commemorate the victories against Napoleon during the Wars of Liberation. They took place in 1813 through 1815. Inside the hall are 34 goddesses holding bronze shields with the names of the battles of the Napoleonic Wars. These statues stand for the 34 Germanic states that emerged after the wars. This is taken from the indoor galleria high up near the cupola. And this shot was taken from the outdoor galleria. The Danube's in the centre, the Rhine-Main-Danube Canal to the left, and just beyond the nearby trees is the old Ludwig Canal. Okay ladies, it's time to get back on the coach and head for the ship. Because of the need to repair the damage to the ship, we had a change of plans. While we were on the tour, River Concerto continued sailing and we reboarded her about 75 miles downriver from Regensburg at Deggendorf. Here's a pleasant after-dinner shot as we continue on our way. Even though we'll still be on board for a couple more days, we had our farewell dinner tonight. This was because we're going to have to eat ashore tomorrow night. More about this later on. Here's Pat and Harry getting comfortable for the cruise show tonight. Even though they do it every week, I think the crew enjoy doing it just as much as the passengers enjoy watching it. Here are a few shots from the different skits they did. If you want to see what they were doing, just press the spacebar or click on the slide. Of course, they had to have some audience participation, and guess who got volunteered? The tug-of-war ended up being a washing line. After the show, we went on deck for a nighttime cuppa. The original itinerary was to arrive at Passau this morning, but the captain had made arrangements for the repairs to be carried out at Linz shipyard. That's about 70 miles further on than Passau. We pulled into the shipyard around 6 a.m. on Tuesday. During the night we left Germany and entered Austria, but we'll be spending most of the day back in Germany. Passau is in eastern Bavaria and a few miles from the border with Austria. It's also known as the City of Three Rivers. That's because the Danube is joined there by the Inn from the south and the Ilz from the Bavarian forest at the north. It has a population of around 50,000, but about 10,000 of those are students attending the local university. We had a few visitors for breakfast today. Actually, all the passengers had to leave the ship after breakfast because no one was allowed on board while the repairs were being done. It was about a 2-hour coach ride back to Passau for our city tour. And we had a roadside stop on the way where I had an early lunchtime pint. On the way into town we drove by Veste Oberhaus, the fortress that was founded in 1299. Today it's a youth hostel and a restaurant. Now for our walking tour of Passau. This fountain is in the main square. Do you have any idea what this sign says? It's obviously about horses. Well, it's a horse butcher. The main tourist attraction in Passau is St. Stephen's Cathedral, a Baroque church built in the late 17th century. Although we were getting a bit churched out by now, I have to say that the ceiling of the nave was impressive. It also had an ornate Baroque pulpit, but it's most famous for its organ, which has 17,774 pipes and 233 registers. It is the largest outside of the USA. We were there in time to listen to a recital. If you'd like to hear a short excerpt from it, you know what to do. We had lunch in town at a beer hall called Bayerischer Loh. And then we explored Passau on our own. Looks like Pat's not sure if we should go up this street. Because we weren't allowed back on board, Grand Circle arranged dinner for all 143 passengers at Hotel Steigenberger in Linz. It was a little unorganized, but given that the staff had little notice, I think they did pretty well. We were back on schedule on Wednesday morning and arrived at Melk sometime during the night. Melk's a small city in the federal state of Lower Austria, and it has a population of around 5,000. Its claim to fame is its Baroque Benedictine monastery named Stift Melk, or Melk Abbey. Once again it was a coach ride to our destination from the dock. Melk Abbey, on a rocky outcrop overlooking the Danube, is one of the world's most famous monastic sites. This photo was taken by a gentleman called Mr. P. Martin. This is the main entrance to the abbey. Our local guide met us in the courtyard and told us all the history about the abbey. It was founded in the 11th century and the buildings date from early 18th century. Today it includes a secondary co-ed school that has about 900 students. I was a little surprised to see these modern-looking frescoes on the courtyard walls. But I was more surprised with what was to come. The first part of the tour is through the former imperial rooms, which are now the Abbey Museum. The exhibition is entitled The Path from Yesterday to Today, Melk Abbey in its Past and Present. It tells the story of the monastery's ups and downs over its 900-year history. The art treasures are displayed along with video and computer animations. To be candid, I didn't like it. There were a number of items on display, but I just couldn't get interested in them in such a modern setting. The next stop on the tour was the Marble Hall. This was much more interesting. The ceiling fresco shows Pallas Athena on a chariot drawn by lions. Hercules can be seen to her left, attacking the three-headed hound of hell, night and sin. This is a clever optical illusion. Pat had to take a second look to make sure. After the Marble Hall, we went to see the Abbey Church. On the left side of this golden altar is a sarcophagus containing the skeleton of Saint Coloman. According to legend, he was the son of an Irish king on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and was martyred in 1012 near Vienna. He came under suspicion as a spy because of his strange language and clothing. He was imprisoned, tortured, and finally hanged from a dead elder tree. From the Abbey Terrace you have a nice view of the Danube, the valley, and the town of Melk. Before leaving the Abbey we bought some herbal liqueur called Magenson. It translates to stomach sun. It's good for the digestive system. We both thought the little market town of Melk was one of the best stops on the cruise. We bought some green walnut snaps from a local lady in the market. We pulled away from Melk just before noon and started the final leg of our cruise. Shortly after leaving Melk we passed Schönbuchel Castle. It's often called the Watchman of the Wachau. Schönbuchel has stood on a rocky outcropping overlooking the Danube for 1100 years. The castle was owned by the bishops of Passau and was rebuilt in the 19th century. This English-looking church seemed a little out of place among all the castles. This is approaching the village of Dürnstein. The ruined castle overlooking the village is where Richard the Lion-Hearted was kept prisoner in 1193. We're about to enter the last lock on our cruise, Griefenstein. Just had to take one last lock shot. We arrived in Vienna, or Wien as it's sometimes called, around 6 p.m. on Wednesday, August the 8th. It's the capital of Austria and the country's primary city with a population of about 1.7 million people. Tonight we had a Mozart dinner, and it was served by a new crew member. This was my assistant, Jana. After dinner we went on a short bus tour around town. It was dark, but many of the buildings were illuminated. After the tour it started to drizzle a little, so we stopped at a cafe for a pint or two. Unfortunately we only got a quick glimpse of Vienna, but from what we saw it looked like we should have extended our trip a couple of days to see the sights. Early Thursday morning and it was time to say goodbye to River Concerto and Martina, the friendly receptionist. We were supposed to fly Lufthansa from Vienna to Frankfurt, but they switched us to Austrian Airlines. At Frankfurt, Lufthansa told us that we weren't booked on their Denver flight, but after I explained that we were, things worked out just fine. We were upgraded to their business class, which exceeded any first class of any US airline. We made our United connection in Denver okay and arrived home about 7 p.m.